Hello guys, so it's the 6th day of Christmas, it's still Christmas time, so I figured let's be casual in this video, and by that I mean, we're not going to make like an argument, we're not really going to talk about anything too important. This isn't like a religious thing, it's not a big economic thing. I just want to talk about different kinds of centrist. But I suppose if you want there to be some sort of point to this video, I guess if there was a point it would be that the term centrist is quite broad and you shouldn't overuse the term, It's kind of fun to make fun of people for being a centrist. However, I think sometimes you might be making fun of one centrist thinking they're a different kind of centrist. So in this video we're going to talk about 3 types of centrist. So we're just going to jump in pretty quick. So our first kind of centrist is a moderation centrist. I didn't want to call them a moderate centrist because that felt a little bit too redundant. Feel free to suggest your own better names for these concepts in the comment section below, because I'm sure you will recognize these types of centrists when I describe what they are. So basically a moderation centrist is somebody who believes that both sides have good points and bad points. Often, if you're aware of the subreddit Enlightened Centrist, then I think that's what, in theory, the Enlightened Centrist subreddit is supposed to be about. I know that Boogie something, whatever his name is, got in trouble for being this kind of centrist, where I think he basically said, like, hey, we shouldn't try to force gay marriage on people, because that's too far. Basically, that's kind of the idea with this sort of centrist. It's somebody who their main motivation for being this kind of centrist is just being very conflict averse and not even kind of liking the idea of there being a division on issues. And they want to say, well, why can't we just get along? Why can't, we all be buddies with each other? And, again, I don't think I actually really need to label the point of what this kind of centrist is. I think when people make fun of the idea of being a centrist, this is the kind of centrist they're describing. Somebody who, their whole shtick is just, both sides, here's the thing. Either they think both sides are terrible, or they think both sides are good. They think both sides are basically decent. Now, let's talk about, we're going to do some pros and cons for each type of centrist. We're going to start off with the pros, because I like to end on a negative. And the pros, I don't think there are that many, actually. And to be honest, I've got 2 down, but they're almost the same thing. So the first one is they're likely to be less tribal. You could say that, of course, actually, when people are very firmly on the left or the right, and they say, no, the left is bad, the right is good. Ultimately, there is a tribalism that comes with that. But if your whole thing is you're a centrist, and your whole thing with being a centrist is saying, well, I'm not on either side, I'm just in the middle. Well, you can't really be tribal about that, so that's a good thing. And, it does open you up to seeing genuine benefit. This is kind of the second point. It does open you up to seeing genuine benefits from both sides. In theory, again, I'll kind of get onto that with the cons. I did actually think of another one, which is, it is quite fun to kind of meme this position, in a kind of like almost post-ironic way. One I really like is it's kind of a enlightened centrist meme, and it's like about World War II, and it's the Soviets representing the left, and obviously the Germans representing the right, and it says, left, we should invade half of Poland. Right, we should invade half of Poland. Me, enlightened centrist, we shouldn't invade Poland. And obviously the joke there is that in a typical formation, the enlightened centrist is saying something that's supposed to be understood as bad, and it's supposed to understand that their enlightened centrism had led them to a bad conclusion. For example, maybe it's like one side wants to do some kind of war crime and another side doesn't want to do a war crime, and the enlightened centrist says, so let's do half a war crime. But in this case, it's kind of funny because the left and the right were both, I tell you what, how the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is actually a good thing, that's a whole other video. But yeah, suffice it to say that when it comes to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, I'm not an enlightened centrist. I see that the Soviet Union were clearly behaving, I'll just say it now, just for the record, better than the Allies, who were like, let's just let Germany get away with it and not even demand any concessions from them in terms of territory. No, what Stalin did was much more sensible. Basically, Stalin did appeasement, which is exactly what the Allies had been doing, except Stalin had the intelligence to also say, let's demand territorial concessions to help build ourselves up. So that was a smart thing to do. It was a good thing. Like, what else was he going to do? Go to war with? Because I mean, that's the other thing. Like, if Stalin would have just gone to war with Germany, would the Allies have helped him out? No. Everything Stalin did was. I don't know. Okay, no, I'm not gonna get into that. But basically, no. But I guess that's kind of why I say it's a good position to kind of meme, because I'm a fan of a meme. It's just when people start getting serious about these like things, then I have to get serious, and then I start revealing what a massive tanky I am. But no, yeah, basically, it's a fun position to meme. Now let's talk about the cons though, because there are definitely some cons. So the first one is insincerity, and generally speaking, the perception is that these kind of centrists actually favour the right, especially people who think like both sides are terrible. So a classic example of this would be like the whole South Park thing, where on the one hand it's like, oh, they're making fun of both sides, but it's kind of like, it feels like there's a sense in which actually the show, you know, I mean, I know that the creators, basically they said, I hate conservatives, but I really hate liberals. So what does that imply? It implies a greater hatred of the people who in the American Overton window are on the left. So that's kind of the idea, and you kind of get the impression like a lot of the time, if your position is between a right wing that actually, you know, is pretty serious in their right wing stuff on, say, immigration and stuff like that, and the left who are not that, you can make an argument that the halfway point really does put you in practice closer to the conservatives. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the criticism, that actually a lot of the time the enlightened centrist thing is really just something that conservatives say because they don't want to get judged, you know, because some people will judge you if you're a conservative. And a lot of time people actually, yeah, you know, like actually claiming that you hate both sides and are in the center. Maybe you don't quite hate the conservatives as much as you're claiming. The other thing is, it might just be a or it might certainly become, if it wasn't initially, just a reflexive position, which of course is terrible. Basically, just like no matter what at that point, because I said one of the benefits is that it leaves you open to acknowledging good things from both sides. But the point is, if you're just going to be centrist all the time, then it's kind of like if you're just acknowledging the benefits of both sides as an end in itself, then that doesn't actually achieve anything. Acknowledging the benefits of both sides so you can make an informed decision about which side actually has the better arguments is one thing. But if you kind of say, oh, I think this side makes good arguments and this side makes good arguments, and that's just going to be your position on every single issue, it's not actually helping you to achieve anything. So that's, not a very good way of achieving something as a centrist. And the final con is basically, it's a pretty simple one. Are both sides the same? Yeah, basically, I'm not somebody who, I do think some people are just like, well, the left is clearly right about every single thing and the right's clearly wrong about every single thing. I don't think that's true, but I do think the left is right about way more things. And I think, the issue is that with this enlightened centrism, this particular kind of enlightened, or moderation centrism, you're reliant on the fact that actually it's correct when you say both sides are the same. So sometimes that can be true. The other thing I need to point out, and this is kind of moving away from the pros and cons thing, is that it's also very dependent on the Overton window. For example, I would say both sides are the same in the UK in terms of political parties, but it's because I think both sides are right wing. I think that really Labour is not a left-wing party. They're a very right-wing party. I think, when you look at it, you've got Labour, Liberals and Conservatives in the UK. They're all pretty right-wing, certainly too right for me. So I would say, they're both the same, but not from a centrist position. And the thing is, even in America, where I would say maybe you could say there's a more firm divide between the Democrats and the Republicans, just because the Republicans are so crazy on so many points, even then, you still have the fact that I think a lot of people say they're both the same, and say that also from the, either from the right-wing position or the left-wing position. So I guess that's kind of the point I'm making. This idea of both sides are the same, it doesn't have to be a centrist position. You can think both sides are the same because you're left of the Overton window in your country, or to the right of the Overton, or maybe you're even bang on, but it's just like maybe you actually agree with the parties, and it's just that the media's, or for whatever reason you're like, oh, but I don't like either party. And I think that's probably true sometimes. You get people who actually would honestly be represented pretty fairly by the Republicans, but they're like, oh, the Republicans, both sides are the same. I'm not sure. Anyway, again, you also get the whole thing about like sincerity here. Like, how many of these people who say both sides are the same actually end up do have a pretty clear preference for one side over the other? I'm not sure. And maybe that's kind of the thing. You could say, actually, are both sides literally exactly the same? Well, no, one side's probably to the left of the other side. Whereas obviously if you're a centrist, I suppose in that case you could be like, well, they're both as far from me. So yeah, that maybe makes sense. But definitely this idea of like both sides being the same, it's certainly a complicated matter. And really, this is only a position you can hold to meaningfully in very specific contexts. Because if you're just somebody who, like, your entire whole ethos is just, oh, both sides, the left have good arguments, the right have good arguments, well, surely that's kind of contingent upon where exactly the Overton window is, where you are in your particular position in space and time. And obviously, eventually, things are going to shift, and it's going to get to a point where surely the right's going to move either further away from you or further towards you, and you're going to say, oh, wait, I agree with the right on more now. Yeah, basically, that's another thing about it. It's just kind of arbitrary. But overall, I mean, the main reason we make fun of it is just because I think it's principally that whole it just being a reflexive thing. Like, it almost seems, and it's something, I bring it up with, it's also a very kind of moderate, and that's I guess why I call it moderation, thing in terms of like, it's very anti-idealist is another thing that's annoying about it. So it's kind of like, these are the sorts of people who say that, oh, we should have some renewable, but we can't have too much renewable, because that's just too crazy. Like, it's sort of the kind of people who seem to think that actual very good policies are impossible. Like, that almost seems to be the moderate position is not only that neither side is offering good policies or offering perfect policies, but that having very good policies is an impossibility. So if you say, hey, I've got a plan to make it so that there'll be complete equal rights for everyone, they'll be like, oh, that sounds a bit crazy. Maybe we should just have like equal rights for like half of people. If you say, hey, I've got this new plan I'm going to come into, and I'm going to introduce a fully single payer healthcare, and it's the kind of people who basically are like, oh, Bernie Sanders, without any actual reason for why his policies wouldn't work, just say, well, it seems too elaborate, it seems too much to just completely change the healthcare system. So let's just do what the Biden did, or Biden was saying maybe he would do. Let's do something a little bit more moderate. Like, that's it. Basically, it seems like the whole thing coming from the moderation centrists is a general sense of, oh, isn't that a bit much? You suggest like this policy, like, we're going to do this policy, it's going to radical change, we're going to really fix things, we're going to make things, we're going to go completely renewable, loads of equal rights, we're going to have this really awesome economic redistributive justice, all these problems, we're going to fix them. And the moderation centrist says, oh, that seems like a lot. Maybe that's like quite a lot right there. I mean, sure, I get you're doing a whole thing, but, maybe just tone it down a bit. That seems to be a thing. And, obviously, I have mentioned before how I think the whole nuclear power thing's very stupid when you talk about renewable energy. It's like, no. It seems to be like literally my impression of that is it's 100% just, well, renewable energy, that's like complete renewable energy. Oh, that would be lovely, but it's like, it's just too much. It's a fantasy. It can't really happen based on no actual evidence for why it can't happen, just the reflexive like thought of, oh, it seems like a lot, it seems idealistic, so let's get some nuclear power in there as well, because that's nice, and it's like moderate, because it's not too good, it's got some drawbacks to it, but it's not too bad either. It seems like that's kind of like, I think nuclear power is like the number one kind of moderation centrist position. Like, if I had to think of one position which would define this moderation centrist thing, it would be like nuclear power, because it's not too good. It's not like renewable energy where there's no risk or anything like that, no bad side, no nuclear waste or anything like that. But it's not fossil fuels, which obviously are very bad for the environment, produce all of this pollution into the air and stuff like that. It's nuclear power. It's kind of expensive. There are downsides to it, but the good news is that it's not it's not too bad either. It's just, that's moderation centrism. And that's kind of, are you a moderation centrist? You decide. But the important thing is, don't confuse them with other kinds. Don't assume that just because you see somebody who seems to be in some way not firmly on the left or on the right, it automatically means they're a moderation centrist. They could be another kind, and that's what we want to talk about. So, number 3, we have the principled centrist. And a principled centrist is somebody who actually conceives of the center as being a position that is uniquely different from the left and the right, and is correct. So rather than a moderation centrist who just says, basically positions themselves relative to the left and right, saying, oh, I'm in the middle, I think one side has good. No, the centrist says, no, the center is a different thing, basically. It's a whole new way of looking at things, a whole new paradigm, and it's the correct way to do things. And the classic example of this would be the neoliberalism subreddit. So the neoliberal subreddit, basically their whole thing is they view themselves as being on the center, or in the center, and they say the center is correct. They answer people, they don't just spend all their time going, oh, the left is right about some stuff and the right is right about some stuff, or the left has some problems, but the right has some problems too. No, their whole thing is, we're the center, we're not left, we're not right, we're better. And that's why I call it principled, because it's not just defining themselves as the moderate version, a moderation in between the two. It's saying, no, we're introducing a new thing, of course, and this is a common term, third way. A third way that's in the center that's going to be better than either side. And obviously, if you go onto the neoliberal subreddit, you will see a lot of this in action. They're not just saying, well, let's be a little bit like the left and a little bit like the right. They're more saying, well, let's do our specific thing, which in the kind of actual political spectrum as it exists, puts us in the middle of the spectrum. But it's not just because we want to be a little bit left, a little bit right. We want to be our own specific thing, which is, this correct beliefs we have, these correct policies. So let's talk about some pros and some cons. So a pro, first of all, I've only got 2, but it's it works better in society as it exists now because it doesn't require any radical overthrow. Sometimes if you have, say, a more left-wing position or a more right-wing position, you almost can't really talk that much about politics in a practical sense because so many of your policies rely on radically changing things. So for me, for example, when I talk about the policies I really support, we're talking about, it would have to start with just this revolutionary, massive infrastructure overhaul. For example, just like changing a huge amount, basically rebuilding the country from the ground up almost. And that's what I would favor in order to introduce what would be my perfect political system. What I actually think, my genuine politics, like, no, let's really rebuild things from the ground up. But that creates an issue when I'm talking about politics, because it's like, if somebody asks me, what do you think about taxes? What do you think about the environment? There's, or maybe, immigration, whatever else, I don't know. The point is, they can ask me like some specific questions, and obviously I can give answers to those questions, but those answers are really always just going to, really what I'm going to have to start with if I want to give a full impression of my political beliefs is, okay, I can talk about that, but let's talk about the massive change in society that needs to happen. And at that point, you can see how that's kind of a barrier to really talking about politics in a meaningful sense that currently exists. And this is, by the way, why sometimes I will literally have like, it's almost like I have 2 politics. And I do kind of have like a, if you like, principled centrist political position. Because I've got like my actual politics was like very radical, all about these massive big changes. But then I also have my kind of, kind of principled centrist politics, which is more like, well, here are certain policy positions, policy goals, laws, changes that could be introduced like tomorrow in this current society as it exists. Here are some changes we could make. And I think generally speaking, actually, to an extent, my politics has become, because it used to be back when I was, a teenager and I really was all into this whole socialism, communism thing. It was like, I just could barely even have interesting discussions a lot of the time because it was just like, I talked to somebody and I was like, well, I just think we should totally overthrow the system and blah, 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 like change everything. And I just found that very boring because it's like, you can't, you're not talking about like transport reform and stuff. I just think, well, just overthrow the entire system and everything will be fine. Increasingly, I have found myself being like, no, actually, let's think about what policies would I genuinely like to see within the system we currently have? What changes? And I think actually being able to do that is a big benefit. Being able to say, well, here are the changes I want within the system we currently have, is from a kind of rhetorical standpoint, as well as just kind of, I guess, a growth standpoint in terms of like, like developing your ideas politically, is useful. And there's lots of interesting ideas I've kind of thought about from the perspective of what would I actually support from, like I say, policies in the current system we have, rather than just immediately going, oh, just revolution, change everything. So yeah, that's actually a genuine benefit. I really do like the fact that these kind of principled centrists who say, we're in the center, we're not about this radical change, we're just in the center doing our thing in the center and it's good. The fact that they obviously can have these ideas they very strongly believe in, and they can talk about those ideas without having to propose some kind of radical changes that need to happen to society first. And I also have another benefit, which is that they do tend to be slightly nuanced, but in a way that is not reflexive. So obviously, I think neoliberals, to an extent, this isn't as true with the moderation centrists, or as true as it is with the moderation centrists, because they are more likely to actually just think that the left and the right are wrong about stuff. Because, like I say, that whole thing isn't like, oh, the left has some good points, right? They think they're going their own separate way. But the fact they're nuanced does mean that they do have the ability to look at some of the benefits from the left, some of the benefits from the right, and incorporate them in. And obviously, they can still do all of that while keeping to their principled centrism. So they can say, actually, that is a good policy, and consider that. So, yeah, I do think that ability to be nuanced is something that's worth giving credit. Now, there are some cons. And not in any particular order. It's probably going to be a bad order, actually. It's just the order I've written down. So the first one, pretty obvious one. Sometimes radical solutions might work. It's all well and good saying, well, I can advocate for my very specific policies and talk about my very specific policies I want to introduce. But is that good if actually turns out that, radical policies might work better? For example, I think a lot of neoliberal people, they care about infrastructure, but it's like, actually, if you care about infrastructure and you also care about getting things done efficiently, maybe being radical, really trying to push for a proper ground up revolution is a much better way to achieve, certain changes with infrastructure and stuff like that, than just being like, no, let's kind of do some taxing and then we'll like redirect some government funding here and do this. And, it's very slow, very moderate, very centrist. Not, of course, the kind of quick action you might want. And that's the reality, of course, that, radical ideas sometimes are what a country needs. And you, as a principled centrist, you're thinking, no, don't worry, the best society, because that's your belief. It's like the best thing. Because obviously, like I said, I'm happy to dabble in some principled centrism. I'm happy to dabble in like, okay, within the society we currently have, how are we going to fix things? I'm happy to consider that. But I'm always aware that it's not the best thing. The best thing would actually be radical changes. But obviously, if you're a principled centrist, you believe, no, this is the best thing. The best thing we can do is just work within the system we currently have. And I think there's plenty of reason to doubt that might be true. And certainly on like really serious things like environmentalism. Also, I think really economic inequality and stuff like that's getting more serious as it goes on. Just saying, we just want to have like these small little policies, slow, gradual change. I don't think that's necessarily very likely to work. And okay, then you got another one, which is, can you really be totally in the center on everything? So you have this principled thing, but of course, the reality is that neoliberals are going to have some left-wing views and some right-wing views. So this idea of saying, well, we're not, we're escaping this whole paradigm. Well, the reality is that to an extent, you are just going to have to say, well, you know what, there are things on the left we like and things on the right we like. You can't go third way for everything. There's some things where it's just, it's just not practical, is it? What else is there? Let's see. Okay. You know what, actually, I'm going to move this around a bit. No, I'm not. Okay, so third criticism. You're likely to be hated by both sides, which is not great optics. Basically, if you look at Joe Biden, for example, he's hated by the right, he's hated by the left. Lots of people hate neoliberals. Let's be clear on that. Neoliberalism, that's the whole thing with the neoliberal subject. Like, neoliberalism is generally used as like an insult. So, while I can respect anybody trying to reclaim such an unpopular word, the reality is that it's an unpopular word. You're going to be hated by lots of people. Now, the final thing, and this is what I want to really, it's the fourth con. It's not a very powerful message, is it? It's just, it doesn't get people kind of enthused. And I think sometimes, well, I mean, one of the issues is a lot of the time it's going to be very sort of, these neoliberals. Actually, you know what? This is a pro. I should have mentioned this. Okay, sorry, I'm going to add in a pro now, because I think actually this is probably what I meant with my second one about it being nuanced, but I just didn't think about it properly. Neoliberals are likely to actually have to think about like very specific policies, which can in a way facilitate them being more intelligent. I do think that the neoliberals tend to be much smarter around policies and stuff like that, because they need to understand the nitty gritty. Like the thing is, if you're a socialist who just wants to completely overthrow the system, you don't really need to know lots of stuff about how the system works. Whereas a neoliberal does have the advantage that they can sound smart by saying like, no, we need this. Like a neoliberal can tell you like almost, I don't know, like exactly what marginal tax rate they think would be the best, and like all of this very specific stuff, because that's their whole thing. They think there's lots of very little tiny things that need to change within the system. And I do think that people like, for example, Destiny, who I think is broadly kind of a centrist, somebody who is all about, we've got to make it work within the system as it is. He does seem to know a lot about very specific policies, because that's something he has to know about. Like it's, he's not talking about just the immediate socialist revolution or anything like that. And because of that, he needs to like think, well, these are these specific policies, and have an idea of what those specific policies might bring about. So that's a benefit. The con there, however, is that it's not very energizing for the average person. The average person doesn't really want to hear about, we've got these very specific, it sounds smart, but does it actually energize people to hear like these very, very specific policies? We need this amount of investment in this area, and it's all very specific, very nitty gritty, well done. But does it actually get people energized? Does it get people motivated? I don't think it does. I think it makes a lot of people feel pretty bored, uninterested. And of course it does create the reality that it's much easier for, it makes it harder to push out a message, which means other people can create messages about you. And this is the big problem the Democrats have. It's, I think the main problem the Democrats have. They're not selling this great big massive message to people. And the reality is that makes it much easier for them to be characterized by their opponents, because they're not bringing out like, here's our big message, here's our big mission statement. So because they don't have one, it makes it much easier for the Republicans to say their mission statement is destroying Christmas or ending the family, stuff like that. If you have like a big thing you can push for, you say this is what we want, it's a really big significant policy goal, then that's powerful. But the problem is, if your position is, we want lots of very specific things, we're not doing anything too radical, we just like, we have the center, we think the center can work, if we just tweak this thing and move this thing around a bit, it can actually come together and we can create an overall system that works better. It's not really about this massive change, it's just about getting the cogs working in the system a little bit better, and it will actually improve it will reduce spending just because it will make things more efficient, and it will increase taxes, and it will reduce the debt, and then debt doesn't matter too much, but whatever. All of that stuff, it sounds, and it could work, maybe it will work, but it doesn't sound very impressive, doesn't it? When someone says, we just got to move all these little things around, it's like we can tweak this tax rate a tiny bit, and that will actually produce, and they can give you all these facts about how that making this change could increase home ownership by something, and that could lead to people having more spending money to, it sounds like maybe they know what they're talking about. The problem is, you hear it, and like, it's not as good as somebody saying, build the wall, for example. That's like something which, it's almost like build the wall is the exact opposite of kind of the neoliberal idea. Like in that neoliberalism is all about these very specific policies where we're like, okay, we've really thought, and we want to make it so that this very specific kind of centrism, like we're going to really make sure to work within the system to fix all these little issues. People don't care. But if you just say, build the wall, that's something which actually has so many issues with it, doesn't really achieve anything, is flagrantly just, rhetoric, just a way of sending a message, and yet it works much better. No one cares about your very specific changes you want to make to healthcare policy or whatever. People do care about like build the wall, fix the system, blah blah blah, and that's it. So now we move on to the third kind of centrist, which I've called the stochastic centrist. And a stochastic centrist is somebody who takes positions from all over the place. Now, here's the thing. We can all be stochastic centrists to varying degrees. Now, there are some people who really aren't stochastic centrists at all. There's actually quite a large number of people, especially on the left. On the progressive left, there's lots of people who basically are progressive left on every single major issue. Every single major issue, you can line their views up with exactly what the mainstream of the progressive left believe. I've spoken about this before. It's a very common phenomenon. I'd argue a very bad phenomenon. However, of course, there's the reality that there are a decent number of people who will fall into a category, which is they do have areas where they can say, oh, the left's right about some stuff. One example, I know people who are right-wing, but they recognize that the left is right about environmentalism. They say, well, I'm right-wing on everything, but I can see that there is science to this environmentalism thing. I can see that the effects of it will be incredibly deleterious. So on that issue, I'm agreeing with the left. It's also possible, a right-wing person, they might agree with the left on immigration. They might agree with the left on infrastructure and, like redistributive economic justice. There's lots of areas where it's possible a right-wing person could agree with the left on one or a few issues. Similarly, it's possible that the left could agree with the right on lots of key issues. Again, I don't know whether or not I would say it even makes much sense to say that gender identity is a left-right issue, but assuming we'll say, okay, majority of people on, if you're right-wing, it's more likely you'll be critical of gender identity. Well, in that case, of course, certainly, you could be a left-wing person who is critical of gender identity. You could also be a left-wing person who's critical of Islam. There's a variety of things. You could be a left-wing person who thinks that, for example, the traditional family is actually a great social good. There's no reason you couldn't think that. In which case, of course, yes, you would be somebody who you're left-wing. Every other issue, your economic, environmental, foreign policy, even, you could say your support for a variety of, kind of different sexualities and stuff like that. However, you believe that you say, but I am really pro-traditional family. And I think that we do need to have policies that are pro-traditional family. Even while we can accommodate, other different identities and stuff, we need to still maintain the idea that the traditional family is the best for society and stuff like that. And you can say, I don't really like the left's idea of divorce isn't a problem and that, it's not a big deal if people don't take marriage seriously or whatever else, Ultimately, that's the point, and that's just, I don't know why I focus too much on that example, because that's actually an example which, to be honest, now I think about it, I don't really know anyone who thinks that. But, that's the point. The point is that you can be on the left, and I guess this leads to a question, which is, are you actually a centrist if you believe this? Or is it just, that it's kind of almost like up to random people whether or not you're considered a centrist? Because do I consider myself a centrist? No. I would say that I overwhelmingly agree with the left, but I agree with the right on some stuff. However, I think people might think you're a centrist. It might come across as kind of, it's a sort of centrism. And in theory, it's along the continuum. I mean, sure, right now, I agree with the left on a huge amount of stuff. I agree with the right on only a little bit. But I could move. And I guess I should stress one thing. So the point about being a stochastic centrist is you have firm left-right beliefs. Or you have beliefs which are firmly on the left, but you also have beliefs that are firmly on the right. And you contrast this to, for example, the other two positions, because it's not so much you're saying, well, my belief is like halfway between the left and the right. It's rather that you're saying, no, I have lots of really hardcore left-wing beliefs and lots of really hardcore right-wing beliefs. You're all over the place. That's the point. Whereas a centrist, like a neoliberal or a principled centrist, their whole thing is, no, I'm in the center. My beliefs are moderate beliefs in the center. A moderation centrist, their whole thing is, I'm in the center because I think both sides make good points on each individual case. For example, me, I wouldn't say both sides make good points on a given thing. I wouldn't say both sides make good points on gender identity. I wouldn't really say both sides make good points on Islam. I wouldn't say both sides make good points on environmentalism. I'm not a both sides make good points kind of person. What I am is somebody who thinks that there are some areas where the left is very right and areas where the right is very right. I suppose this might still be confusing, so I really do need to stress what I'm saying. I mean, in other words, that it's not that you think that on an individual policy decision, the left and the right are both correct. You think that the left is very right about very broad things and the right is very right about very broad things. But you think that actually you have firm positions either on the left or on the right on different issues. So, for example, Hillary Clinton doesn't have any firm leftist positions, nor does she have any firm right-wing positions, really. She is in the center. Whereas I, by contrast, am nothing like Hillary Clinton. I disagree with Hillary Clinton on almost everything because there's some areas where I'm really, really hardcore left and very much to the left of her. There's some areas where I'm very hardcore right and to the right of her. There is not really any area where I'm with her, like, oh, it's just like moderate in the center. And that's what I mean when I say stochastic. Now, of course, you can have some areas where you sincerely would be on the center. But the point I'm making is, basically, it's not somebody who is just saying, oh, I'm, like moderate in the center, generally when it comes to policies. So let's talk about some pros. And here are some pros. Pro number one, you literally can take the best policies. So this, with every other case, this has had kind of caveats. So if you're a moderation centrist, well, can you take policies from both sides? Well, no, because you kind of then you'd have to be taking a firm side. With the liberals, neoliberals, and principled centrists, that's kind of an issue too. With the stochastic centrist, you can just firmly jump to the right or the left depending on who has the correct opinion. So you can just say, you know what, I'm totally agree with the left on this one, so I'm with the left, or I totally agree with the right. An environmentalist who's right-wing, a right-wing person isn't obligated to, if they're a stochastic centrist, to just assume the moderate position on environmentalism. They can be totally on board with the left-wing position, and that wouldn't contradict them being a centrist, so that's a good thing. You also get, I guess this kind of touches on the fact that you can also assume any of the positions that are correct for the principled benefit centrist, you can have that those benefits too. So you can basically agree with the principled centrist, and obviously you can also have the benefit of nuance and stuff like that. Now, the other issue is, the other benefit is you can engage in dialogue more easily. And the reason for this is because you will be able to talk to people from both sides on areas where you agree. And you can kind of, that can be like a little thing you can introduce. I agree with you on this, but I don't agree with you on this. Boom, boom, boom. Much easier. Now, the final thing is, and this is the big one, you can sell yourself enthusiastically to both sides. And I want to stress the point, enthusiastically. So take, for example, me. I could super sell myself to the left. I could be like, okay, we really need economic redistributive justice, and we need environmentalism, and we need feminism, women's rights, all that kind of stuff. I can really push that. I can push it hard, and I can make that a big thing. But I could also sell myself very enthusiastically to the right by saying, you know what, we need to stop this gender identity cult that's taking over. We need to, I'm just trying to think what other, we need to curtail the effects of radical Islam. There we go. Those, I could easily push those. And I imagine actually that based on those two, or saying those two things, it's possible that lots of people could agree with me. It's possible that people who are on the left might think, well, I don't really like what he says about all this stuff, but environmentalism is a serious problem. And if he's on the left when it comes to environmentalism, if he's on the left when it comes to all these quite important things, maybe I do actually agree with him. Maybe I do like what he's putting down on the whole. Now, somebody on the right might say, well, I don't really agree with all this kind of left-wing stuff. It seems a bit weird, but Islam, it is a pretty serious and dangerous ideology. So if he's talking, about how Islam there really is a problem with Islam, I think maybe I'll have to agree with him because no other politician's saying that. And that's kind of the point. In a world where so many other politicians are just bleh, no other politician's giving a firm, really hardcore committed stance on environmentalism. No other politician's giving a firm stance on Islam or gender identity. The reality is that people basically have a choice of, do they go for a party that's just going to do nothing and just be bleh, in the middle, centrist, boring, or do they go for a party that might do some of what they disagree with, but some of what they agree with. They'll get actual things they agree with. I think for a lot of people, they'd be very tempted by that latter option of a party that would actually do something. And that's certainly, for me, kind of true. I would rather vote for a party that had more policies I actively oppose, but had some policies I could genuinely enthusiastically support, than what we have now, which is loads of parties which I really don't feel strongly one way or the other on. So there we go. Now, obviously, there are some pretty obvious cons. The first one would be that it might be the case that you actually end up just getting hated by both sides. I actually think that's less likely, because I do think people are so bored of just the lame centrism that they would focus more on the stuff they like than the stuff they dislike. But I could be wrong about that. And of course, from an individual thing, you might get people who are like, oh, I really agree with him on lots of stuff, but I can't vote for him because of all this stuff. And I'm kind of assuming, like, from an electoral standpoint, just because, I don't know, for some reason, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about centrism. Or, like I said, like, what are the pros and cons in terms of actually changing society? And obviously, to change society, you kind of need to get elected. Number two, you could get mistaken for insincerity. People who don't understand the idea of, like, actually agreeing with the left on some stuff and agreeing with the right on some stuff might say he's not really a progressive, he's lying because he disagrees with gender identity, or something like that. Pretty obvious point. I think this is more likely to come from the left, to be honest. Like, I think the left is way more likely to be like, he won't. So not just that they would disagree with my right-wing stances, but also that they would conclude from my right-wing stances that I don't really agree with left-wing stances. And I've literally seen gender identity extremists, for example, say things to the effect of, basically, if you are critical of gender identity, it shows you were never even a progressive on the stuff where you appear to be a progressive that's unrelated. So if you are critical of gender identity, you were never really a feminist, you were never really pro-gay, whatever else. So yeah, people might claim you're insincere. And I guess, okay, I put this as a con. It's not really a con. I basically just wrote, are you really a centrist? And the point is, obviously, if your goal, I guess, if I were to kind of reflect on what was the point of this video, it's like, if somebody put a gun to your head and said, be a centrist, then you've got three options. You can either be a moderation centrist, a principled centrist, or a stochastic centrist. And I think it's pretty clear that what I'm getting at is that being a stochastic centrist would be the best kind of centrist. But the question is, would you actually be a centrist? And the argument you could kind of say is no. It's a weird situation though, isn't it? Because am I a centrist? Well, I have lots of very hardcore left-wing beliefs, but I also have some right-wing beliefs. I'm certainly, like, I'm further to the left than a lot of progressive leftists on a lot of issues. But I'm definitely very much further to the right than them on lots of issues too. So how does that balance out? Do I end up being a centrist? It's hard to say. In some sense, there's there's almost intuitive arguments both ways. The intuitive argument of no is that actually very few of my beliefs are in the center. And I'm, really just say, well, seeing as none of my beliefs are in the center, I have to either be left or right? Like, if I don't have any kind of really centrist beliefs, then surely I'm either left-wing or right-wing. It would be silly to say I'm centrist when I have no centrist beliefs. And he would say, well, do I have more left-wing beliefs or more right-wing beliefs? I obviously have more left-wing beliefs, so I'm on the left. But there's also an intuitive argument the other way, which is, well, hold on a minute, you can't say you're on the left if, when you look at your policies holistically and your views holistically, there's clearly some stuff which places you on the right, which must drag your overall political persuasion this way a bit. So you are towards the center. Intuitive arguments both ways. I guess, if somebody does put a gun to your head and claim that you need to become a centrist or else they'll shoot you, you need to make sure that you convince them that being a stochastic centrist would actually qualify as being a centrist. I guess the conclusion here is, though, if somebody's not putting a gun to your head, you don't really need to be a centrist. Like I say, I think stochastic centrism is kind of true, but the question is it really centrism, or, is kind of the best system? I think being a neoliberal, I can understand, like, that aspect, but to be honest, I think associating with it is not necessarily a good idea. I'm actually getting a call right now from somebody, so I'm going to hang up. So I guess I'm going to say that the upshot is that the pros and cons don't really make centrism correct or not. The real question is, are the actual ideas correct? To be honest, I would say that moderation centrism is just like a personality feeling, like actually get a spine and just hold a position. The principled centrism, I can actually respect it. If you're a full-on neoliberal who just genuinely believes it's the correct position, all power to you. And the stochastic centrism, yeah, I think actually the reality is the progressive left isn't correct about everything. The conservative right definitely isn't correct about everything. So to be honest, yeah, taking positions from like saying, oh, I agree with them on some stuff, agree with them on other stuff. That does make sense. But it's not as if, like, really, you probably shouldn't end up just finding yourself exactly in the center. The reality is you should probably end up agreeing with one side more, just because, there's no reason to assume it should be perfectly balanced, as all things should be. Anyway, that's the end of the video. What was the point in that? I guess, Merry Christmas.